Party on, Todd.
Party on, Sal.
Rock on.
Rock on.
All right. Welcome back, POJCasters, to another episode of the Party on Johncast. Podcast full of most excellent tunes, most excellent beverages, whatever we're drinking, awesome theology, and just general good conversation. So this is one of your hosts, Reverend Sal Marco, an ordained teaching elder in the Presbyterian Church USA, in the Presbytery of Newton, in the validated ministry of chaplaincy.
Ooh, and this is Reverend Todd Laddick. I am a pastor I'm an ordained elder of the United Methodist Church of Greater New Jersey, serving a congregation in Newton, New Jersey, no longer completely on higher ground than Sal. Sometimes on higher ground than Sal.
Sometimes, but God's providence went over.
God's providence gave Sal a pass. So awesome. And
we'll get into that in a little bit.
Absolutely. So I guess this brings us into our Hebrews segment.
Hey, Todd.
Yeah, Sal.
How do you know that God likes coffee?
How?
Because he had Moses write about it in the book of Hebrews.
Ooh. And Moses could have been the author as opposed to anybody else, because no one knows who really wrote Hebrews. Of course, Moses would have been quite old if he wrote it.
That's very true.
He wrote it from heaven.
He inspired Paul to write it, or something like that.
Absolutely. So, Sal, you are drinking something far more interesting than me, so why don't you start?
I will. So I am drinking Shiner Bock. It's from the Spotswood Brewery in Texas, out of Shiner, Texas. It is technically a microbrew. It's their Bock, which is a darker beer. It's a regular lager type beer, but it's a darker, so they call it a Bock. It's kind of a regional beer, kind of like Yuengling. Best way I can describe the taste of Shiner is it's similar to Yuengling. I would put it above Yuengling in terms of taste. It's somewhere between Yuengling and Sam Adams in terms of taste. But they do some seasonal beers around the holidays, which are really good, like with molasses and pecans, and so. But it's one of my favorite. I just got into it. You can get, like Yuengling, you can get, I don't know, for those that don't know Yuengling, it's a East Coast regional beer. You can only get it in the Atlantic states and New England.
Yuengling, yeah.
So I'm not sure about Shiner's distribution, but
those of you who haven't had Yuengling, though, you are missing something. It is quite good.
It is good.
Yeah.
And like Yuengling, obviously I've been drinking one. Like Yuengling, you can get a 6-pack of Shiner, which is technically a craft beer, for about $7 or $8.
Yeah, can't go wrong.
Whereas most of your craft beer is, $10, $12, $13.
They're snobbish. They're for the elite.
Yep. So Shiner is like your working class craft beer.
Yes, so. Yes. Yeah, what's up with that elite pricing there?
I know.
Anyway, by the way, I found out that your aunt's pronunciation of pecan versus pecan is actually regional. Depending on where you go in the country, regionally, depends on how you pronounce that.
Okay.
Kind of like tomato.
Tomatoes more. Okay, I'm gonna correct you on that, because technically that was my ex-mother-in-law.
Oh, sorry, I said aunt, didn't I?
I did.
Sorry, aunt, whoever. Your ex-mother-in-law. Yes.
So for those,
I want to compare your aunt to your ex-mother-in-law.
So according to that, technically, according to the Canadians, you pee in a can and you eat pecans.
Yes. Well, that's what Canadians say, eh?
Hey, got a boot.
We always, no offense to Canada, but we in America always base what we say off of Canadians.
That's right.
And France, of course.
And France. Try not to speak like those French Canadians.
By the way, have you eaten your freedom fries lately?
I have not. I've been trying to stay away from freedom fries.
Oh God.
I have enough freedom already, so thank you.
I went there, didn't I? Yeah. Yeah, right. I have the freedom to not eat freedom fries or French fries or whatever the hell you want to call them.
That's right. Take that, France.
That's right. That's right. Oh boy. Okay, so
what are you drinking?
oh yes, me. Back to the issue at hand. So
one of us is being good.
Right. So I am drinking sparkling Poland Spring with a twist of pomegranate lemonade. And if you have not had this is one of their most delicious flavors. I love it. And it is, I cracked it open when Sal was talking about our podcast and, it being a, about, all things theology and what we're drinking. And so I cracked it open there. But if you can hear it fizzing, it is delicious. So I'm going to have a sip of this right here. And guess what? It tastes just like it says. Pomegranate lemonade.
Nice. There, just to, I don't know if you heard that, but just so I can get my sound in. I opened my next beer.
I definitely heard that. And so yeah, I've been on a health kick. Since I came back from vacation, I told myself I was going to kind of take my health back and get healthier. And while having an alcoholic beverage was not necessarily the height of my unhealth, it certainly doesn't help. Nope. It lowers your inhibition, and then you eat crazy and stupidly. So basically, I'm abstaining from that for the time being. I know, boring, but I like dry drinks, and sparkling water is dry, so I'm at least consistent whether I'm teetotaling or drinking.
Seltzer has been lately my go-to because you can get deals on it at Costco, and
it's so good. It's just so good. It's so refreshing. It's bubbly. It gives you that carbonation, but it's just so good. I love it.
Yeah.
So
I have generally been in a healthier mood, but I figured for tonight I need a.
Yeah, by all means, don't be boring like me. So if I'm not, sampling anything too crazy in the near future, it's just because I've lost 11 pounds, so it's paying off. What can I say?
I'm not too far behind you. I've lost about 7. So, and we'll get into that later.
Yes. So, I guess then that brings us to our most excellent music segment. Sal edition, because we're going to talk about Sal, but not in the segment, but not a little bit. Yeah,
my music is so. At least my performance of music is so.
Okay, so who wants to go first?
Well, why don't you go first, since I went first for the Hebrews segment.
Sounds good. So I am picking for my song. I'm picking a song called Dead Flowers by Demon Hunter. I'm not sure if they have an actual video for it or if it's a lyric video, but I will post whatever video they have. But they have an album upcoming called Songs of Death and Resurrection. It's coming out March 5th, 2021, just, obviously about a month prior to Easter. Mm-hmm. And so it's in the heart of Lent. And the songs are called, or the album's called Songs of Death and Resurrection. And it's not like new material. It's like all material that they've done before. There may be... it looks like all the songs have been done before. So the song I'm picking off of it is the second track on the album. You can sample it now if you have Apple Music. They have two songs out. The first one is Dead Flowers, and the second one is I Will Fail You. It's the resurrected edition. But Dead Flowers kind of seems like an appropriate song for the time we're in, and so I'll read the lyrics really quick. I feel ashamed with abandon in my heart and on my face. I suffered the blame I would show to you this way, but I'm too late. When the sorrow, it breaks them, I will replace them for you. Dead flowers for the torn apart, laid at the grave to heal a broken heart. Let it rain until it floods, let the sun breathe life once more, reborn. Wish you the same, to walk beside and carry on this flame, to see you again with a radiance of pure and holy name. When the sorrow it breaks them, I will replace them for you. Dead flowers for the torn apart, laid at the grave to heal a broken heart. Let it rain until it floods, let the sun breathe life once more, reborn. And then it continues. So, in this day and age where the whole society seems to be in an upheaval, where we've gone through transition after transition. I mean, we just had President Joe Biden take office, and the first report we get from him, who has been very clear that he's putting the pandemic front and center in his list of things to get done. And we find out that, the supposed stockpile that was awaiting him to send out, that the government was supposedly holding on to, well, there is no stockpile, and it was all a big lie, and we're in far worse shape than he or anybody else anticipated. And it's we're in this crazy time where nothing seems right, and everything we seem to be holding are dead flowers, and yet there's the hope that even dead flowers can, even from dead flowers, new life can be born, can be reborn, and that there's hope for the broken and for the brokenhearted and those who are torn apart. And I think in the time we're in, there couldn't be a more powerful lyric for people. So
that's kind of the life cycle of nature, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Plants have to die to be reborn. So
correct. Yeah. So it's a powerful song. We'll put it in the episode notes. And
nice.
So that's my take. That's my pick.
Nice. I just added it to my Apple Music, so I'll take a listen.
Yay. Did you add the whole album so it just pops there miraculously on March 5th? Yeah.
I love that. I did that with the new Love and Death album too. So it's like, oh, new song pops up.
Yeah, I love it too. Yep. Cool. So what did you choose, sir?
So it kind of goes with our theme, maybe not as directly as your song, Todd, but it goes with the theme of transitions. It also kind of goes through, it's been a couple tough transitions. If you've watched the news, this presidential transition wasn't exactly smooth or peaceful. So there's a song by Trip Lee off his 2010 album that I've been listening to. It's called For My Good. He bases it off of Romans 8:28, I think. That God will work all good things through those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. So that's what the song is based up on. So he starts the song by kind of just talking. And he says, you ever feel like stuff just never goes your way, like everything is against you? Well, God never promised he would keep me away from all those trials. If I want perfection, I have to wait till later. And I ain't tripping, because he has promised that he will work all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Let's praise him for that. Then he goes, it's about that time to let them know how this is how we feel about him. So the first verse is, I know this life may bring pain, a broken heart. I've shed my share of tears, plus I've got loads of scars. I've had my ups and downs, my rises and falls. So sometimes people ask me how I survive it all. I tell him about my Lord. Let's get it understood. My King controls it all, and he does it for my good. My Savior brought me, then he gave me new life. This is in his name. Now that he got me, I know that he'll bring me through the pain. For my good, you did it all for my good. So,
yeah, definitely fitting for this time we're in.
Yep. No, and and I think Tripoli he's actually ordained as a Baptist pastor.
I wasn't expecting him to be Methodist, but
but I think he considers himself. He's on Reach Records, which is Lecrae's label, and most of the artists on that are either Reformed or Reformed Baptist. So, kind of fits with my theology to a degree. So.
Yeah, and there's really nothing in that song that would disagree with Orthodox Christianity as a whole. I mean, it's pretty
straightforward.
Pretty straightforward, yeah.
Simple orthodoxy. Yeah.
Cool.
So that's my song. So we'll link it to the notes.
Absolutely. Send over a video or whatnot of the song, and it will be posted. It shall be posted. So I guess that brings us to the end of our most excellent music segment. And that leads us into our main topic for today, which we're going to start off. We're talking about ultimately about different transitions that we've been through, but we're going to start off with Sal and a transition he has been going through, and then we'll get to the theological end of things. But Sal, why don't you lead us into your transition in life?
Sure. We'll get into gracious transitions in a minute, but let's go over my transition. I think it was gracious. I hope it was gracious.
It was gracious. Yeah, it was gracious.
So I mentioned briefly at the end of the last episode that when you heard it, I would no longer be the chaplain at that place that I used to work at, nursing home / continuing care retirement facility. I did take a job with a hospice company. It's a company that's been around for a while. They had it's part of a national company. I was hired by their regional company for New Jersey. They're a growing company in terms of they've been around for a while, but they've had some legal and financial setbacks in the past. So they are essentially rebuilding themselves. They had to cut a lot of staff, eventually got bought out by venture capitalists, and then sold to another hospice company. So the current owner is a nationwide company who are aggressively growing in New Jersey. So I'm doing hospice, which is a bit of a change from what I was doing. I was doing senior living chaplaincy, which has a lot of overlap with hospice because as you'd imagine, a lot of my residents in my former life ended their life on hospice. So I had an understanding of what hospice was, and a lot of the overlap in pastoral care is the same in terms of what we do as chaplains. The only difference is hospice chaplaincy is the only chaplaincy that is mandated. What I mean by that is most facilities or hospitals or secular organizations aren't required to have chaplaincy. It's a luxury to have chaplaincy. Now, obviously, a lot of large hospital systems, a lot of large healthcare systems will have chaplains because they see it as it's been proven to be beneficial. They're not required to have chaplains. So often during financial difficulty, chaplains are the first to go because they're the hardest to prove that you need clinically. But in terms of hospice, because hospice is run and paid for by Medicare, that damn socialist healthcare.
How dare they?
How dare they? but Medicare, CMS actually mandates that hospice has a chaplain on staff.
Do you mean to tell me that socialist healthcare actually recognizes the need for theological clergy support?
They understand the need for spiritual support.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a myth busted.
There's a myth busted. Take that, communists. So yeah. So obviously, when I've been looking to get out of my position at that place for a while, for the last about year and a half, went on this interview. Just randomly submitted my resume because I was like, you know what, I just need to keep putting out my resume. Put out my resume. Thought nothing of it. Got an email back from a chaplain that who was a student when I was a per diem chaplain in New York City, and he remembered how much he had learned from me. I was like, okay. But regardless, he remembered me. He knew how much I had helped him through the CPE experience. So we did an interview. This is back in the beginning of December. He said, hey, come here. We'll have a chat at 2:30. Come early, around 2:00. We can sit and catch up. Got there a little after 2:00. And he pretty much said, hey, listen, I know your character. I know your work as a chaplain. I have 5 other candidates. I'm not scheduling interviews with any of them. The job is yours if you want it. I said, let's do the interview first. So we did the interview. I was flattered. He said, obviously it's told me the number for the salary. I was like, oh, okay. So did the actual interview. Felt very comfortable. Felt like a place that really valued their chaplains. There's room for growth. He's retiring soon, so there's a chance to take his position in advance. They offered me well over $5,000 more than I was making.
Which would be in the millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah,
yes,
man.
yes.
Yeah.
Not to brag. Damn you, communism. So I
that's where all the Medicare all the Medicare expenses go to your salary.
They go to my salary. Well, and that's the difference between nonprofit chaplaincy and hospice is because it's funded by the government, they can afford to pay me more. Mm-hmm. And it was well over 5,000 more than I was making. So I, had to like not show my cards and say, well, let me go home and talk to my wife about it. I walked out the building and said, yep, I'm taking it. Next morning I went in and sat down with my boss at the facility and said, yep, I'm resigning. I'm giving you a month. And this is before I had even called to confirm that I was taking the job with the other company. And then called them and said, hey, I'm taking the job. They were like, awesome, glad we're going to fit right in. So needless to say, I resigned December 4th and I started January 4th. So that gave me some time to, as we're going to talk about, transition out of my position, which is really just about saying goodbye and ending some of my long-term relationships. Yeah. And I think it was overall a gracious transition. The thing that kind of complicates it, not that it really complicates it, but I was hired to cover 3 counties in New Jersey: Morris County, Sussex County.
I'm laughing. Sorry, that was my inner laugh, but it came out.
So basically, it couldn't be a full break from my former community because I now cover that community as a hospice chaplain. And within 2 days of starting, I had a patient at my former place of employment. So,
oh, sorry, that came out again. Which meant that in that moment, I was still on higher ground than you.
That's right. Well,
God has a sense of humor.
Damn you, Calvin. Actually, that's not Calvin's fault.
No, technically not Calvin's fault at all. He can't help if he's right.
So, and because of no fault of my own, there was some hiccups with my transition. So my end date actually came out later than I thought.
That was the less graceful part of your transition.
That was the less graceful. So I was supposed to end the 1st of January. I ended up ending the 2nd of January. But it worked to my advantage because I got to get 2 doses of the COVID vaccine via my former employer.
So yeah. So where some grace drops, more grace is found.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, rock on.
Yeah, rock on. Not so graceful, and I left there with a rather heated email to senior leadership in the company saying essentially this is a crock of bullshit. And if you're hearing that from your fucking chaplain, you're in deep doo doo.
Yeah, that's true. If your chaplain is telling you that the ship is all but sunk, you might want to open your eyes. But but
as far as the local community is, I left on good terms. I have good relationships with some of the key people that I need to have good relationships with: the director, the social worker. I left on good terms. So,
and really with the company as a whole, I mean, you voiced your disapproval of some of the things going on, but you did nothing to warrant, being looked at in an unfavorable way. You've always been a loyal and faithful chaplain there, and I'm sure they appreciated your years of service, and they may not have liked your "this is bullshit" email, but that's not leaving on bad terms. That's just voicing what's going on. That's actually doing your job before you leave your job.
And speaking truth to power, but not always the best. But so yeah, it's been a good transition. As I mentioned before, I have lost weight because I jokingly put on Twitter that it's been 2.5. Well, at the time, it was 2.5 weeks from transitioning, and I have been eating better, and I've lost weight because I am less stressed. And it was like I'm like, geez, I think I was in a not a good dynamic.
In an unhealthy situation.
Yeah. So I've left an unhealthy situation for a healthier situation, and my health has benefited from it. I've lost weight. I'm eating better. You wouldn't think about what I'm drinking for the podcast, but I'm drinking less.
Well, you're doing that for leisure tonight. So there's a difference between having a leisurely drink and and needing to calm the nerves down, right? So, well, awesome, and that is a good thing that you have found a place where you're fitting in, where you can still, fulfill the call that you have to chaplaincy, but do so in a way that's healthier for you. So, bravo.
So,
and that. What's that?
Yay transitions.
Yay transitions, which brings us into a transition we've all been going through. And we're going to talk about the graceful end of things. We could certainly talk about January 6th and the not so peaceful transfer of power that took place between November and Inauguration Day, which was the 16th, right? No, the 12th.
No, the 20th.
The 20th. It was the 20th. Why am I talking 12th? I was thinking it's a week after, but it was actually a week after the the riot. So the 20th. So Inauguration Day, people look at it as like, oh, look, once again, America has shown the world that it can have a peaceful transfer of power because we held an event where there was no riot. Unfortunately, 2 weeks earlier.
Yeah, the riot was 2 weeks earlier.
Yeah, there was a riot, and it's hard to call a riot trying to overturn millions upon millions upon millions of people's votes, in the electoral college votes, peaceful. It just wasn't. We did not this time around, and hopefully it's the last time around. We did not have a peaceful transfer of power.
Group of people actually sought to undo the will of the American people because they were pissed off that their guy didn't win.
Yeah, and more than that, they were pissed off that he didn't win. They had been fed lies by the most top person in government. Let's just call him for who he is, Donald J. Trump. And many people like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and just countless other people, 130, 140 other Republicans that even after the riot decided to vote to overturn the results, to stop the results, and to uncertify the results, to be fair, I guess is what they were trying to do. But like, the point being is that those people really, really, really believed that the election was stolen, even though even though we had a fair, one of the fairest and most secure elections ever, despite the crazy rule changes and stuff like that. And despite the fact that 60 courts adjudicated that and found it laughable.
30 plus lawsuits that were tossed out because of
30 lawsuits tossed out.
In the middle of a pandemic, which I think really is what caused the whole. It was the most voted. It was the most turnout for a presidential election. I think because of because people didn't have to leave home to send in their ballot, so why not send it in? You know, a lot of people will avoid going to vote just for whatever reason. It's hard to be lazy and not vote when all you have to do is fill out a piece of paper and mail it in. So there was, and the Republicans that were standing against this, some of the states, like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, they were doing so because there were certain, especially in Pennsylvania, there were rule changes that were made that they said were unconstitutional, but every court it went to, every lawsuit that was filed was found to be without merit and tossed right out of court. It even went to the Supreme Court, which has a majority Republican on it, and they laughed it out of court. So, 3 of them were appointed by the said president.
Yes, 3 of them appointed by the former president. So, unfortunately, people really just, didn't believe government, figured that the fix was in, even if it were Republicans. And actually, in Arizona, I'm not sure about Arizona, but definitely Georgia, you're talking about a completely Republican government overseeing the election, and yet it wasn't good enough. It was still rigged. So, to these people. So anyway, the point is hopes got high that somebody was going to win. They didn't win. They thought it was rigged. They thought the Constitution was being trampled over. And so how do you, in a constitutional system, overturn that? Well, you riot, of course, because there's nothing more constitutional and more democratic than storming the Capitol and trying to take away democracy. So
and somehow, I mean, peaceful protest is a linchpin of our democracy, but not insurrection and storming the national Capitol building to disrupt our democracy.
Correct. And a lot of people blame the Democrats, especially on the Donald Trump side, tried to blame the Democrats for doing the same thing when he was elected, that, like from the moment he took office, they were trying to impeach him, which is not actually true when you go back. I mean, yes, there were some who wanted to impeach him, and Nancy Pelosi said no. There were plenty of people who poo-pooed the idea of impeaching him until he did something impeachable.
It took 3 years for him to do something impeachable.
Right. Like, they didn't impeach him on day one. Yes, they held they had Mueller look into collusion with Russia, but actually that was not started by the Democrats, was it?
No, it was started by the Republicans.
It was started by the Republicans, right? So there's a lot of truth twisting that has been done along the way to make it look like the same thing happened to Donald Trump. But I can tell you, as much as there were many people who would have loved in their heart of hearts to overturn the election in 2016, they didn't. Not even Hillary,
Hillary conceded within a couple hours.
Couple hours, yeah, within a couple hours, yeah, and
even with that, and part of the problem with January 6th is that it was stoked by a guy, Donald J. Trump, the Cheeto in chief, who even from January 2017, when he legitimately won the election, lied and said it was rigged. For 4 years, he told his base that the election was rigged, and yet he won. But somehow it was rigged by the Democrats and the Russian hopes. So you have this base. Now, granted, you can't lump all Republicans in there, but
no, you can't.
You have a very large base of his supporters who would rather listen to the guy who tells it like it is and listen to lies than to actually understand that we have a process in this country that works.
Right. And I know that before we go any further talking about grace, because we haven't gotten into the gracious transition part, but before we go any further, there are going to be people out there who might be shocked, like, oh my God, these are pastors and chaplains talking about politics. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yes, let's talk.
There is this weird dynamic in America where you could be a corporation executive, you could be a Christian who attends a church, you could be anything you want to be and be a blowhard for your political views. And we see them all over Facebook, all over Twitter. We hear them at our family dinner tables, right? Like, if you need to say it, you can say it, but otherwise, but then there's this caveat. But if you are clergy,
right, and
I've had this happen in family. If you're clergy, you're not allowed to tell me what you think because you're clergy.
Yep. Stick to preaching religion, Reverend.
Yeah, stick to preaching religion, Reverend. You don't have a say over what happens to your country. So, and I'm not exactly sure where or when this fully cropped up, because it in the 17, 18, and even parts of the 1900s, clergy were very active politically.
If you look at the history of this, especially within the Reformed tradition, if you look at some of the history of, especially in this country, some of the strongest proponents of the rebellion were pastors, Presbyterian pastors, because it was because of the link of religious freedom to our government.
And historically speaking, so were Methodist pastors on this side of the Great Lake that is called the Atlantic Ocean. Wesley didn't so much like it because he was subject to the king. But when you look at Asbury and Koch and others, they very much embraced the American Revolution. They knew it was going to happen. And when they won, when the Americans won, between the Presbyterians and the Methodists, you can't find two denominations that were more influential in the not only in the support of America, but in the crafting of America. I mean, you had Benjamin Franklin, who was a big proponent of what's his name, Whitfield. And George Whitfield, of course, was not just a not just a Reformed minister, but he was also a Methodist. So there's in one person the embodiment of both denominations. So
the only clergy to sign the Declaration of Independence was Witherspoon.
Yeah, Witherspoon. Yep,
who was a Presbyterian pastor and former
Also, the Methodists were very much involved. In fact, during the Civil War, the Bishop Simpson at the time was very much connected to Abraham Lincoln, and there were Methodist, generals and soldiers who, when we started to go down into the South during the Reconstruction, right after we won the Civil War, even before Lincoln maybe even before the Reconstruction, but before Lincoln definitely was assassinated, we would go down and take over some of those United Methodist Episcopal Church South churches and claim them for the North, with military. So once Lincoln found that out, he put an end to that. But I mean, we're talking about people that were very much not only steeped in God and religion, but were also steeped in their country and the politics of the time. And consequently, the main United Methodist Church has a building right next to the Capitol building on Capitol Hill. Because it was, there were many Methodists, many Presbyterians, and since then many more other denominations that have been on Capitol Hill and in the Senate and Congress. And
right now, that's make a very important caveat here. That doesn't mean that we were founded as a Christian nation.
Correct. Yes. It means that Christians were involved in the founding of the nation, not that we are a Christian nation.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the confusion comes in, because there's this belief, and it started with James, was it Madison? I believe it was Madison, who wrote in a letter about the separation of church and state. And while that is not necessarily fully written into the Constitution, it has become a precedent that America has really understood as important, that we can't have the state messing around with religious things, and we can't have religious institutions messing around with the government. They have to be separate.
And it was Madison who, and when we were over the famous Marine Corps song in the shores of Tripoli, we were over in North Africa.
Yeah,
Madison was very clear that yes, we are not a Christian nation. We were founded on principles of Judeo-Christian principles, but we are not in Christian nation.
There's no one religion that the United States endorses that is open and free to all, and that's the principles of America. But nowhere in that did Madison or anyone else believe that Christians or any other religion couldn't be a part of the Christian faith. And so it becomes important for us to realize that while it's separation of religion, it's not separation from religion. And pastors and clergy are like anybody else. They live in the world. They may not be of the world, just like all Christians are not of the world. We live in the world. We live in the countries that we belong to. And we not only that, but we take part in the countries and the politics of the world we live in. So this idea that pastors for some reason or other should remain silent and can't weigh in on political matters is silly. Not to mention Jesus himself and the apostles and all Christians throughout all the last 2 millennia have weighed in on political issues, because in political issues we find, wait for it, moral and
ethical issues. And to think that the very people who are supposed to be teaching you moral and ethical decision making shouldn't have a stake in moral and ethical decisions.
It's silly.
Yeah, to say that political decisions are not moral or ethical is ridiculous, because it's not truthful.
It is right. It's not truthful. And while I think Sal would agree, we refrain from voicing in an official capacity, voicing our support for one candidate or the other. That does not mean we're not going to broach upon political issues. And now that the former president is behind me, I have no problem saying, whew, thank God. I was not a supporter of Donald Trump, but that shouldn't be a surprise to people. If you read the Bible, you read the gospel, and then you look at the track record of the former president.
And I've I don't know about you, Todd, but I've definitely faced pushback of the very folks who've told me don't stick to preaching the religion and don't get into politics are the very people who falsely assume that because I'm clergy that I supported Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
Because of the politicized
Yes.
nature of, well, if you're a Christian, you fall on the conservative, right wing, Republican.
And that's the problem with the world we live in, where there is no such thing as an expert anymore. And that was certainly the last 4 years. Experts were frowned upon. Populist opinion was the way to go. And in populist opinion in conservative America, all Christians must be conservative.
Right.
And that's never been the case in American politics, ever. So anyway, that to say, yes, we're talking about politics, and I'm personally thankful for President Joe Biden. Now, if you asked me, back last year when it was primary season, that if I was hoping that Joe Biden would be the front runner, probably not. There were plenty of people in the Democratic side of things that I would have I couldn't say anything about the Republicans because they didn't offer anybody but Trump. But on the Democrat side, you had Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris. You had a whole slew of people that I was interested in looking at. Cory Booker, even he's done well for the state of New Jersey. Did well for Newark when he was the mayor there. I mean, there were plenty of qualified people that I thought would have done a good job. It happened that Joe Biden won out. And I think looking back on it, he was the person we needed for this time period following Donald Trump. He was the most, ironically, he was the most polar opposite of Donald Trump than anyone up on that stage. And Kamala Harris really balances him out. And so, I think they make a really, really good team, the two of them.
I think polar opposite, and I think in the terms of what we're going to get into is the graciousness of transitioning.
Yeah.
I think I know some of my progressive friends would say that his policies and his way of doing politics is not progressive enough.
Of course. But that's also, I think, a part of the problem of the world we live in, where everything we want done has to be done now. And that was the Donald Trump way of doing things, too, which is why I think when you look at a Bernie Sanders, while his policies may be as far away from Donald Trump as you can possibly get. And if you look at policy wise, Bernie Sanders is the polar opposite. When you look at temperament and you look at ideology in terms of we want our way, and I think of Jim Morrison, we want the world and we want it now, that was very much what Donald Trump brought, but just on the opposite side of the spectrum. Joe Biden brings a temperance, a wisdom, and a willingness to be gracious and work across aisles. Now, there are certain principles he's not going to budge on. And he shouldn't. He's the president. We elected him to be president. We knew what he ran on, and damn, that's what he's going to do. But there are a lot of areas where there are more things that unite us than divide us, and yet we focus on the things that divide us. And I think Biden recognizes that, and that's why he upsets progressives, and he upsets the extremist on the right as well, because he's temperate.
He's temperate, and he has from at least since November. Has talked of reconciliation and healing and unity. Now, obviously, unity requires repentance and reconciliation, but he understands because he is I won't say good. He is a faithful Catholic, and there will be Catholics and there will be Reformed folks who say, well, he's not because he believes in abortion or he supports abortion. Regardless. He is a church-going Catholic who receives communion and follows the doctrines of his church as best he can in his
hasn't
personal
been excommunicated. Right. And truth be told, on the abortion issue, when he was recently asked about that, they asked him, well, how can are you a Catholic? And if so, how do you justify your how do you what are your statements on abortion or something to that effect? And his answer was, I am a faithful member of the Catholic Church. What he was really saying there was, listen, what I decide to do for the good of the whole of the country, separate from the church, is one thing. But where I stand in my personal faith and beliefs is with the Catholic Church. And the president any president has to make decisions that aren't always going to completely line up with their religious beliefs because, again, separation of church and state. So,
yeah. And I think, the whole, historically, if you look back at Kennedy, there was when Kennedy was elected, we were a majority Protestant country.
Correct. Yes.
And so there was this fear that if we elect a Catholic president, he's going to be more faithful to the Pope than the country, and blah blah blah, yada yada yada.
Which proved to be completely untrue.
Which proved to be completely true. And I mean, there's still some of that sentiment in the country now.
Yep. This is only the second Catholic president we've ever elected. Joe Biden, which is, how many years later?
But if you look at Biden's tone since the election, he can quote scripture from memory. He has constantly, routinely spoken of grace and extending grace to the other side. He realizes that the other side of the table has been overtaken by lies and fear mongering. Yeah. He wants to reunite the country. God bless his heart. It's going to be an
I
epic.
Don't envy.
Yep, I don't envy him. But also, I think it's a tall order to do as president. But I just lost my train of thought.
Well, while you're regaining your train of thought, it's a good segue into what I was thinking. A good example of what you're talking about is Biden on inauguration day. Biden on his inauguration day on the 20th of last month. He just said he had that morning, as he does before any big event in his life, he goes to Mass. That's something that's very important to him. He goes to Mass regularly, but he always makes sure he goes to Mass before something major is going to happen, just to center himself. And so he went to Mass at the Catholic Church there in Washington, D.C., which is where Kennedy's funeral was held and whatnot. And he brought with him Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and also Kevin McCarthy, the House Majority Leader. And the news were like, why would he bring them there? And of course, their answer went down a completely partisan political line and said, well, because he's talking about unity and bringing the nation together, he needs to show that, he's going to work with both sides. And so he invited them to church. And I was thinking to myself, no, he brought them to church because he's a faithful Christian. You don't bring your enemies to church for no good, like just to play political games. He could do that anywhere. He brought them to church because he is a faithful Christian. The people he brought to church are Christians, and he wanted to show Christian love and grace to people he disagrees with because he still loves them as brothers in Christ. Like that. It's so hard for the secular world to grasp that kind of graciousness, but Joe Biden, he that's who he is.
That's who he is. I think Biden is the epitome of the progressive Christians that the secular world wants, but they don't understand because, wait, you're progressive, but you do these traditional Christian things.
You're progressive, but you're Orthodox? How does that work?
That's a whole other discussion.
Yes. No. And I think Joe Biden has always been a moderate. He's always believed in working with people he disagrees with because he finds common ground with everybody. And I think that in his nature comes from his Catholic Christian faith. I mean, that's who he is.
And if you look at his 40, some of the Trump supporters will say, well, he's been in politics for 40 plus years. Well, if you look at his 40 years of public service, it's out of that Catholic faith that he's done public service.
Yeah.
You also look at, he was sworn in to Congress after losing his wife and child in
He
a
was
car
sworn in at the
crash
hospital.
at the hospital.
Yeah. And he was going to quit.
Yep, he was going to quit.
And he was asked to just give it 6 months, and he decided to give it 6 months, making the commitment that he was going to travel from Washington to Delaware every day that he was needing to be in Washington, which is like, I think, a 2.5 hour, if not longer, train ride. I'm not sure if it's each way, or I don't know. I don't know how long it takes to get there and back, but it's a considerable amount of traveling on his part, because he didn't want to give up being, there for his kids.
Yep, and he lost an adult child. So he's leaned on that faith to get him through.
Yeah.
But he's kept it private. He's kept the separation of, here's my political policies, here's my spiritual life.
Yeah, and no doubt
that they inform each other.
They do inform each other. There's no doubt about it. But if he's being asked to make a decision for the whole of America, which isn't all Christian, he has to. That's where it's tricky. I always say I don't envy politicians on either side, because you have to compromise your beliefs at some point. Sometimes, like if I'm a president who doesn't like war. And Obama will tell you this. Sometimes I have to make decisions to do air drone strikes on people or put troops in harm's way, because that's my job as the president.
Right. Obama, who did not like war, but has the most drone strikes under any presidency.
Right.
So
Obama, who loves immigration, but yet deported more people than anybody else. I mean, his record. He makes Trump look like less of a deporter, but the difference is why he deported them. That's the difference.
And that reminds me of the other thing I was going to say about Biden, is that I listened to one of his speeches yesterday or recently, and I think it comes out of his faith. Is he has signed some executive orders and is committed to racial equality.
That was today. Yeah.
Social justice. Signed some executive orders in terms, and not just, he supports Black Lives Matter, but I was glad to see his executive order today also did to bridge the gap with Indigenous folks.
Yeah.
Having worked with some of them in seminary.
Yep.
They're oft forgotten minority in this country, working to bridge the gap with, working with reservations and tribal councils to do for the good of all Americans, because they are Americans. They're sovereign nations, but they're also Americans.
And he kept saying counties, or he kept saying states, counties, cities, and tribes. And he kept saying tribes. And he also, and we say today because we're recording this on the 26th, which is a Tuesday, but he also signed into to law that a memorandum telling the government to stop contracting out to private jails, which was kind of funny when I heard that. I was like, private jails, like the idea that a corporation could profit off of the incarceration of people.
Very good documentary called The 13th.
Yeah.
That's the 13th Amendment, about how, especially, that's a moral issue. Private prisons are profiting off not only the prison industry, but primarily off the backs of brown and Black people.
Absolutely, who by and large disproportionately get put into. Now, there's some white people who get put in there as well, and there are always those people who say, well, more white people are in prison than Black people, but proportionately speaking,
statistically for population, proportionally more Black, brown people go to prison.
By far.
And then the point of this documentary was, if you look at the 13th Amendment, it ends slavery unless you're incarcerated. So basically, it lays out this argument that since the end of slavery in the 13th Amendment, the way for the continued use of slave labor of brown people was, well, you just put them in prison. Because when they're in prison, they lose all their rights.
Right. As does anybody, but for Black and brown people, when you're in, it basically incentivizes discrimination. You know, that like, oh, well, we're going to pick you up on the least of charges. And if we can, we're going to throw the book at you because, you know, it benefits us. Now, it's not said that way, but in essence, that's the practice.
Yeah. And that I'm glad to see Biden's commitment to systematic racism and dismantling that. And in his vice president, as an example of that, choosing the first female woman of color and woman of South Asian descent. I mean, that's a
woman.
First woman. That's a legitimate, concerted effort to live out that wanting to break down that systematic.
I think I can, yeah, for sure. And I think I can add to this because I don't think my wife will mind. But we were watching the inauguration on January 20th, and I just, you know, happened, you know, there was Kamala taking the oath, and I happened to just look over to my wife, and she had tears rolling down her cheeks. You know, like, she's not one to show her emotions. You know her. She doesn't show her emotions. Oftentimes it's hard to read where she is on any given moment. But in this moment, it was very clear what this meant to her. And if it meant that much to her, what it meant to like all women across the board who had never thought in their lives that this was possible. Right. Yeah, ideally, like, you know, when we grew up in the 80s, we knew the possibility there could be a woman someday, but the likeliness was not there. Right. No one thought a woman would get to this level, and yet here she is.
Let alone a woman of color.
Let alone a woman of color and a woman of South Asian. Yeah. So, you know, it you know, when I saw that, and I knew it before I saw that, but you know, it really kind of cemented for me the significance of her, Biden picking her,
and the fact that the inauguration committee made a point of having the young poet laureate,
Amanda Gorman.
They had the African American, the first African American fire chief from Atlanta, who did the I forget what she did, but she did it in American Sign Language.
Yep.
There was a concerted effort to put female voices.
Yeah, J-Lo, and
Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. Yeah,
Lady
and
Gaga.
Amanda Gorman, by the way, right after that poem, I went on Amazon and pre-ordered her poetry book coming out in September. So I have a long time to wait for it, but what a poem. Like, if there's somebody who's 22 years old and she captured the struggle, and yet not the struggle, but the success and victory and grand, the grandeur of America. You know, like, what makes America America is this right here, this, that we can go from being a place that is less than ideal to a place that is more ideal. We'll never be fully ideal because we live in reality, but this idea that we can progress, right, even if it's an inch at a time, we're progressing.
Was it Lincoln that said, I forget who it said, I think it was Lincoln, but said a more perfect union, more perfect union. Didn't say a perfect union, a more perfect union.
More perfect union, right.
I always like that Obama in an interview on Mark Maron's podcast says that, you know, as a president, you want to just to know that you moved the dial a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. If you've moved that dial a little bit, you've done your job. Yeah. And I think that's the wisdom. And Obama understood that because Obama is actually really more progressive than Biden, but he picked Biden as his vice president to temper that because he had the wisdom to realize that you can't just push your way through. You have to be able to. In order to make lasting change, you have to be able to work with people on things. And you can argue where Obama may have succeeded or failed on that, but there were certain areas where he succeeded, largely in part because he had a Joe Biden on his side, and they were able to get stuff done to move the needle a little bit. And then, of course, as in all pendulums, that went back this way, and now it's going back this way, but hopefully a little bit further than it was in previous years. And you know, that's the beauty of America, and it's frustrating. It's a frustrating beauty, but it's beautiful. So I think we talked about gracious transitions.
I think we did.
Gracious transitions doesn't mean there aren't going to be things that stand in your way or that it's going to be an easy go. Grace may be free, but it's never easy. It's never cheap.
Grace that isn't free isn't grace.
Right. And grace that is cheap isn't grace either. You accept it. It's free, you accept it, but there's going to be a journey along the way, and that journey isn't always going to be easy.
Yep.
So rock on.
Rock on.
Well,
talk about transitions.
Yeah, talk about transitions. So I guess that brings us to the conclusion of this podcast. For those of you who support us through Patreon, thank you. You have a video on the way that will be released at the same time as this podcast. Do check it out. If you haven't supported us yet, why?
For the cost of a espresso drink at Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks, you can hear and see bonus content.
Yeah, and I'm shaking. Sal and I are shaking our heads like, why haven't you? Like, we just can't understand it. I actually, believe it or not, there are people I support on Patreon because I appreciate what they do. And do they require it for me to listen to their material? No, but their material is good, and I like to support them, and hopefully you feel the same way about us. This is all done free, but it isn't free to do.
So your support on Patreon doesn't go to Todd or I. It goes to paying for our hosting fees and website maintenance and all that stuff.
Right. So thank you for your support, those of you who are, and those of you who aren't, hopefully you will consider supporting us. But in the meantime, friends, remember, be excellent to each other.
And don't be a jerk.
Amen.
Amen. Oh, and we'll have pictures of my new tattoo.
Oh, yeah, and I'll have a picture of my new tattoo. And by the way, I'm going for another one on Thursday. Yay. Yay. Okay, so be excellent to each other.
And don't be a jerk.
Rock on.
Rock on.